Good afternoon. My name is Alex Slaws. I am an independent asset manager and I represent owners and investors in their functions and in their interactions with hotels. The relationship in between the hotels that we encounter is with the big brands, but more importantly with the people that actually work in the hotel. And I really want to split in between those two groups, because the way we look at it, those are very, very different categories in people that we deal with. But before I go ahead, perhaps the panel can introduce themselves and then we'll take it from there.
Good afternoon. My name's David Bridge. I've been in hotels for God knows how many years, but I kind of went in via IT, then got involved with finance because my background was with Price Waterhouse. I then moved into bad banks. I worked in with Securum, who's a Swedish bad bank. Following that, I got involved with, who was it? My memory's fading now. I did a little bit of work with Westmont, and then I worked with Jones Lang for a while, and then finally got fed up with the politics and became independent in 2004, and been happy ever since.
Good afternoon, my name is Christian Dijkstra. I'm director at C1 Capital. We're hotel owners and asset managers. We currently asset manage 8 hotels and we own 3 together with partners. I've always been in hotels, that's all I know really. Did hotel school and worked in hotels, and in 2008 started working for the owner of this building, and in 2013 we set up C1 Capital.
Okay, the first topic we'd like to discuss is revenue is vanity and profit is sanity. Profit is actually the one measurement where all parties that I just described come together. If a hotel is making a good EBITDA, that means that the incentive fee for the operator is good. That means that the valuation for the owner is increasing, and that means that the people who work in the hotel get better bonuses and hopefully better career opportunities. It's the one thing that brings us together. But profit is driven more by maximizing revenue than it is by cutting cost and by giving a knee-jerk reaction. Now, the role of the revenue manager is crucial in my opinion, because in my opinion, the revenue manager should be on the executive committee, and it's next to the general manager, the financial controller, the most important person in the hotel, because it drives the operation. Historically, revenue management, however, has always been tucked away under sales and marketing, and there is many large operators that still structure that way. Yeah. Personally, I think that's wrong. There's a lot of self-justification in marketing and sales, and we are not critically looking at how things have evolved over the last 15 years. What are your views on that? Christian, you want to go first?
I agree. I mean, I think there is definitely a movement towards the revenue manager becoming or playing a more important role and a more visible role. As you say, historically it's always been tucked away in the sales and marketing department, and from an owner's perspective, not a very accessible position. The position or the resource becomes a bit more accessible the more you push for information or the more pointed questions that are given. I'm seeing a trend towards the revenue management function being centralized, which is good and bad depending on the property. I think the issues we've had in the past is that the revenue manager can become very detached from the property, where historically revenue management was very much looking in the rearview mirror as to what the trends were. Today, I think, probably covered in this conference quite nicely, it's more about what's coming and reading into those trends and having a centralized function. It depends on the asset, of course. If you have a nice shiny property in London, maybe you get a bit more attention, but unfortunately we've got some properties that aren't in such great locations, and the attention is not as dedicated as could be. So I think definitely in terms of where they sit, there's an improvement. I think hotel managers, operators still need to figure out how they deal with where this position sits in terms of making sure that they keep in touch with the actual operation. It's fine to centralize it, but the person needs to be clear on what's actually happening in that market, which can be quite difficult to do when you're removed.
Thank you. David?
How many revenue managers are there here today, just out of interest? Okay, so we're preaching to the converted. Good. No, I think it's really, really important that the revenue manager is part of the management team, because these are the people who actually know what's actually happening in the business. You've really got your finger on the pulse. You're seeing how you're comparing with last year. You're seeing what's producing, what's not producing, and you really have got to, give actionable data, information to the marketing people, to the sales people. And if you're reporting to those people, it gets rather a little bit difficult. And sometimes you've got to critique what they're doing or what they're not doing. And if you're actually, your career actually depends on them giving you a good appraisal or a good review or whatever, doesn't make any sense. So I think really, you've got, revenue managers have to be in that executive team, usually reporting fairly directly to the general manager to avoid any kind of conflict. But I think it's also good. I mean, I worked with Ritz-Carlton in Penylonga in Lisbon. There, it's quite good that there's also a regional revenue manager that my revenue manager reports to. So there's another person that's got the experience, knows the system. Because half the time, I mean, you guys are so technical and knowledgeable and mathematical, you lose most people. I mean, that's the problem. I've seen director of sales that have no idea about revenue management whatsoever. You're talking a different language, but I like the language you talk, and I will always continue to back and support you.
Because we're numbers guys, right?
Absolutely.
I think what you're saying is absolutely right, and I think the one thing is that there's almost a disconnect, and it's almost that when it comes, and I don't want to knock on marketing or sales because it's equally important, but the development and the way our industry is moving is more and more towards revenue management, which is subsequently underpinned by a sales team that needs to action. And then you can say like, okay, but the way a sales team is function is often archaic, if I dare say, and is often very much driven by what happened in the past or what we've always done. And that actually hinders the development of revenue management. And I don't know if you guys feel in a similar fashion. Please let us know, or shoot if you feel that it doesn't always work. And the bigger the brand, and I'll get back to that in a little later, the bigger the brand, the harder that gets. First, I'd like to talk about communication. The way I look at it, 80% of my job is communication, because an owner speaks a completely different language from a management company, and the management company in turn speaks a different language from the people, the general manager and a team in a hotel that actually live and work and breathe the hotel. The operational team is the worst off, because officially they're employed by the owner and technically they report to a management company. And they need to balance that in the middle, all for the overall benefit of the hotel. And that's a very difficult situation, particularly when brand standards are being pushed down that don't make sense in a geographical area that you are. What are you guys' experiences? And I'll start with David this time in this area. And can you name some examples of where communication from an asset management perspective is so important?
I suppose the key to it all is making sure that everyone's speaking the same language and actually has the same objectives. I think that's usually the issue. I don't normally find it that difficult that the employees are employed by the owner. I mean, obviously the operator tries to keep control all the time, and that's one of the issues. I like to get in. I actually like to talk to people. I like to look at systems and go through systems, but I get a lot of blockage at times. I think I heard an expression coined the other day about manchise. So it's an owner getting too involved and too hands-on. And I know a lot of operators are not very keen on that, but I think it's essential that there's someone there that's actually looking after everyone's interests, the whole hotel interest. Because not every operator has a great system. I see some of the systems where I go through and people are pulling this report from one system, another report from another system. Then they're cutting and pasting, putting it all together. And I think, what a waste of time. The system, we ought to be we as asset managers ought to be putting pressure on the operators, because the staff can't do that. I mean, it's very difficult for you to criticise the operator. You're employed by them, your career depends on them. So it's down to us to go back to the operator and say, I don't think this is appropriate. You're spending 80%, I think the guy from Duetta said, you're spending 80% pulling the data together. I want you to spend 80% actually analysing the data and giving action points. And I think that's where we've got to spin it round.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think from a property level, I think the management teams tend to be more cooperative. From a brand level, as David says, there's a lot more resistance when more information is being requested. In my experience, I think at the end of the day, all three parties have a very similar objective. They want the hotel to do well, be successful, and the key players in that will be motivated by that in various ways. So I think the success I've had in the past has been to have conversations with the brands to say, okay, this is what I'm seeing in the hotel. As David explains, spending 80% on this. I mean, we've got hotels where the GMs have access to every system you can imagine, but they don't know how to use them. So there's no use in providing it if you're not going to provide the training for it. Or you've got revenue managers who do know how to use them, but they're too busy analyzing historic data, whilst a lot of the software can assist with future data, and they're not given the opportunity. So I think that it's really kind of aligning that process, and because regional teams are, regional, so they don't have the time, and they probably don't realize the issues per property. And I think that's where, as an asset manager, we can add value by putting pressure on the brand or the management company to say, look, this is an issue, let's find a solution. Because at the end of the day, having inefficient staff is not to anyone's benefit.
I agree. I think there's two things that sprang to mind as you guys come up with your comment. The one thing is, an asset manager is not a glorified general manager. And I think that's a very, very important point. People who are coming from the hotel industry that become asset managers should not go into their comfort zone and do something that the general manager is supposed to do. Yeah, if there's something wrong in the hotel and it can't be solved by the general manager, then maybe you should look for an alternative. But you don't have two general managers, that sort of work with it. And that role needs to be really sort of, you need to, in a certain way, keep yourself at a distance, but simultaneously, you need to look very carefully of where the disconnects are. It happens from time to time that a brand is coming up with something that theoretically sounds great, that in the PR machine sounds very, very, very good and attracts a lot of attention and traction on the web, but doesn't work in the unit. And I think that's very important, and it is all about the unit. If there is no hotels, there is no us, and that goes for all of us in this room, as a matter of fact on this conference, and I think that's very important. It's not about some fantastic system, it's what can it actually do for our hotels. And I think that's where you came back from, David, as well. And that brings us nicely to the big brands, and I see a few big brands in the room, and I'm very happy to see you guys. But historically, large operators offered revenue management, distribution, loyalties as the big benefits for the management model that a hotel company ran on. But the value of loyalty schemes can and has been and will be today discussed at length. The value of nimble distribution has been discussed and will be discussed at length. So where does that leave us? Yeah, and I'm talking in this case particularly about Western Europe. I'm talking about North America. I can understand that if I want to open a hotel in Lagos, Nigeria, that I need a brand. Yeah, because the brand will give me training, it'll give me staff, it'll manage a sense of direction, etc., etc. But if we look at Western Europe, and if we look at North America, and if we look at what's happening in the Middle East, because that's sort of on the cuff of moving in between one and the other, things are changing. So where does that leave the big brands? And secondly, if we look at the Marriott Starwood merger, if we look at the Accor Fairmont FRHI, if I say correctly, merger, what does that do to the brands, and how do you see those roles, Christian?
Time will tell, I guess, but it's a. I think it comes back to where you've got big brands who create a strategy for the entire estate, and that can cause challenges in certain markets. And I think it's down to the regional teams or the local management to be able to communicate effectively what is required from them. I think the brands can be positive. I always tell my GMs that the louder you shout, the more you get out of the head office, and I think that all applied to this also. I think with the emergence of technology, where it's more accessible, and in some cases free, the advantages of having a brand are maybe not as strong as they once used to be. That's why you see the growths, or significant growth in the UK, but that'll come in Europe also, of the third-party management company, because they're a lot more nimble. They have their ear to the ground, and I think a lot of brands lose touch with that. I mean, we have 6 hotels with one operator, and they decided that as a group for that brand, they weren't going to do an advanced purchase rate anymore, which was great in Germany because people didn't want to pay in advance. But in the UK, it worked really well. Everyone else did it. So you've kind of lost out on one way of distributing your rooms, and in some hotels we were losing 250,000, 300,000 pounds a year as a result, and on the profit line. So I think it's things like that which will become more pronounced as these companies become larger and are not able to provide the local knowledge for each market. As an asset manager, that's what we're there to do, but I think we'll see a lot less reliance on the brands, and people who can leverage the brands in the right way probably end up with a franchise, because they have a lot more flexibility, and they can then benefit from the value adds that brands can bring for the recognition, etc. Although in many markets that's no longer a necessity.
Thank you. I think what you're saying is right, and I think shouting is one thing. Brands are a little bit like children, in my opinion. Is that if you make sure that the communication is good and you push them from left and you push them to right, then it sort of goes in the right direction. If you don't do that, they just sort of do what they say in the tin, and it works. But the big question, what you touch on, and we'll hand over to David, is there really added value? I mean, if you add up all the hidden costs, you end up with losing 12% of your turnover. What can you do with that 12% of your turnover? And you're off.
Thank you very much. I have a very strange hotel down in Lisbon. I've got a golf course, 1.5 golf courses. I've got a spa. There's a very large catering business there. There's lots of weddings. And 50% of my turnover is non-rooms. And I have to ask what benefit the operator actually brings to that. Yeah, they're reasonable on the room side. They're not bad on some of their systems, but on a lot of these other activities, they don't really bring an awful lot of added value, and they don't seem to have the ability to yield some of that business. Golf you can yield quite easily. You've got times of day, seasons, and all the rest. Catering's the same, particularly the weddings. You need to set up all the rules to see when you should take a certain amount of business, your minimum spends, your minimum packs, attendees, etc. So there's all that type of thing going on, and yet the brands, the operator just doesn't have that knowledge. So that always worries me slightly. And of course, the operator is corporate, American. They don't really have that local, authentic feel either. So there's a bit of a disconnect there as well. So I have to say I'm not a great favour of the brands, maybe for rooms, but I would actually quite like to maybe break up the operation a little bit more and actually get experts in on the golf, experts in on the wellness, I think, Alex, and a few of the other areas as well. So you've actually got a real team, all experts of their own little areas, and I think it's very difficult to actually find that with one operator.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if you think about total revenue management, and if you think about the way we work as well, and I shared that with you guys before, if you take an average day in the life of an asset manager, right? You've got a whole day to review a hotel. And what are we going to do? We're going to spend 4 hours looking at rooms, yeah? Which arguably, what you say, is the best covered. We're going to look at every distribution opportunity. We're going to look at channel management. We're going to look at the comp set. We slice and dice the data until we're blue in the face. Then we're going to talk about F&B, even though it doesn't make any money at all. So really, I mean,
I disagree.
Okay, but I'm talking about it makes, relatively speaking, less money. Yeah, not on the banqueting side, and we do that for 2 hours, and subsequently we've got 10 minutes left, and we go, oh, we got to do the spa before lunch. Yeah, in the example that I'm referring to, we have a spa that takes over 6 million Swiss francs, and no one is looking at it. No one is looking at the integration of your golf, yeah, a spa, or any other opportunities into a total package, which is sort of holistic. Why are there no recipes in the restaurant that refer directly back to the programs that you do in a well-being facility? Yeah, why is there not something in your rooms that links you to that, so that you have a whole package and that people can actually do something with your stay? Even if you're on mice business, even if for whatever purpose you come, and I think that's where we're having all these loose strands, and we look at it, and it needs to be totalized and work together.
But the real problem is it's a silo mentality, isn't it?
There you go.
You've got the F&B side, you've got the spa side, you've got the golf side. But they don't actually talk together that often because they're all using separate systems. So there's no kind of hotel analytics where all the information's actually taken together, and you can actually look at the operation. Yeah, it would be great if you could actually see that this customer, transient customer, eats so often in your restaurant, uses spa, uses the golf, but we cut down in different ways. We don't look on that axis, and how that's really crazy. I mean, it's absolutely, and I'm kind of looking to you revenue managers to get into total revenue, and then to get into profitability as well, and really be the hotel analysts of the future.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I really enjoyed it, and have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.